Well, good morning. I'm Jeff Coleman.
And I'm Debra Pinkerton. Welcome to this special edition of Morning Light, a conversation on legalizing and normalizing marijuana in Pennsylvania.
In just a moment, we're going to talk to these folks behind me. The Morning Light panel will go behind the headlines.
But first, coming up a little bit later in the show, we will hear how a woman who lost her son to drug abuse turned the tragedy into something positive, and learn about a faith-based treatment program that helps young people and adults.
But first, the Associated Press is reporting that for the very first time, daily marijuana use is outpacing daily alcohol consumption. According to researchers, it's the frequency of marijuana use that leads to addiction. So is this a good trend, as some suggest, a safer, less alternative to alcohol? And is marijuana a positive way to deal with anxiety and depression?
It will be interesting to hear what the panel has to say about that. Well, the journal Psychological Medicine suggests teens who use cannabis are 11 times more likely to develop a psychotic disorder. Higher THC content levels and the widespread availability of marijuana for medical and recreational purposes is a driving factor. So how should community leaders respond, and how can parents get the right answers?
These are very, very tough questions, Deborah. And findings published in the Journal of the American Medical Association of some 250,000 pregnant women, 31,000 of them identified as cannabis users, links the drug to a range of complications, including preterm birth, lower birth weight, and an increased admission into neonatal intensive care units. So if the science is sending a warning, why is public opinion shifting in favor of full legalization of marijuana? We're going to ask the Morning Light panel for honest feedback to these difficult and complicated questions. And we're so honored to have this trio here. Josiah Malinich, Lifeway Church, Dr. David White, one of our new medical contributors here, and from Aspire Health as well, and Dan Bartkowiak from the Pennsylvania Family Institute. Josiah, I'm going to begin with you because this is really kind of a generational question and a major shift that for many people feels like it happened overnight. And that is, we go from people, all kinds of stereotypes and prejudices, and really, you're not a good person if you use marijuana. And then overnight, there's a change and a shift in attitude to normalization. What has happened? What's been the driving force behind it?
Well, I think that if the world loves anything, then it promotes it, right? And I think in the same way, we've become desensitized in our culture today, even in the church world, and in the way that young people view the world has become less and less through the lens of the Bible. And I think that that's part of the problem, is that we've kind of got to this place of this desaturated content of what truth is. And the reality is the Bible says that though all things are permissible, not all things are beneficial. And I think what we continue to see changing, what we see in Gen Z and even Gen Alpha now coming up, I think what we're seeing, even potentially millennials too, we're seeing this cultural idea that whatever we can do is serve ourselves, whatever we can do to help ourselves. And you'll have the arguments of, oh, it could help my body, or depression, anxiety. I think that's some of the stuff that you guys are, discovering. But I think the biggest reality is that people think it's helping them, but the reality is we can't serve ourselves. We serve what God says, and the Bible says to be sober-minded. Our hearts are to be in alignment with God. And I think if anything takes us out from being able to be in a place of soberness, then I don't think it's a helpful thing. And so people are saying it's a good thing, and it's creating this excitement around it.
So Dr. White, in your practice, is when people are asking you about marijuana, medical marijuana, should I use it, should I not, you see what they're bringing to you. You're seeing big problems: depression, anxiety, separation from a spouse, child moving to college, all these big life events. And the answer for many people, mental health experts even, hey, try a little, use it wisely. What's generally your response?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think you identify something very important, is rarely do patients, in my 25 years in the emergency department and urgent care and more primary care, rarely do they bring that as the primary issue, as a standalone question. It's usually in the context of suffering, brokenness, a history of sadness, anxiety, grief. There's a whole complex nature of personal experience of brokenness that comes to that, and people are hungry for an answer. And so what I've discovered is the answer to that question is profoundly complex, as we all know that. But one of the things that I had to do, and I do think it's advisable for the Christian community, is to be willing to step away from an overt or an abject vilification of marijuana.
Right. Okay.
Because it's when we do that we lose a voice in the conversation. And I think we need to enter the conversation as a conversation where there's a relationship and a pursuit of understanding the individual.
So you're saying when this issue comes up at the dinner table and you find out that a family member has been using, or grandma has been using, or a son or a daughter, that the immediate reaction shouldn't be a heavy hand, like the kind of Archie Bunker response to it.
Right. I mean, now my sons are now 30, 28, and 26. That's a lot of experience of things done well, God willing, and a lot of things done poorly. And what I've been able to go back to my sons all these years later is that so many of my heavy-handed or my what appeared to be legalistic or law-dropping responses was my own fear. So I think what I'm learning and have learned, and what I advise people in terms of entering that conversation, is admit your own fear. Like, I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of where this may take you. That's a good starting point rather than the accusation, the point, the law.
Now, Dan, your organization, Pennsylvania Family Institute, is involved in the public policy side. And so, again, overnight, what you're seeing is a major push to legalize all forms, really almost without a debate, without people asking the tough questions that both these gentlemen are suggesting that you ask. So how did it happen? Where did it come from? The idea that marijuana is really a solution to budgets, deficits, to personal problems, the range of issues.
No, they're questions that need to be asked. And I think, Dr. White, in your time at the ER, I can think when you were starting out, I was in high school. And I think we need to recognize there's an industry that has really changed what marijuana looks like for society. The THC content, so the psychoactive component of marijuana, that potency has changed dramatically since I was in high school, where, dry flower, smoking was 1-2% THC on average. Now it's 18, 20, can be 30%. And when I was in high school, vaping wasn't around. There, edibles,
so this
concentrates.
Isn't the Woodstock marijuana, is
right.
what you're saying.
And I think so much that the conversation thinks, I've heard it over in the Capitol, that this is harmless, it's not addictive. That's not today's marijuana. When you're using 90% THC concentrates, I mean, this is having significant health problems. And so that needs to be part of the conversation. Sadly, what we've seen, oftentimes when this conversation comes up, it's the dollar signs.
Yeah.
You're seeing revenues. Really, we need to see people. We need to see the public health, safety. How is this impacting families? And I think the daily use of high potency THC is something that is very new to society, and it's causing a variety of problems.
Do you think people really know, Dr. White, when we're talking about marijuana, what we're talking about? Or is there just a range of understanding or misunderstanding?
A very broad range. And I think there's a profound lack of information. I do think there's been some recent consolidation of really good research that's beginning to point to where the risk is, where it is not, what the medical benefits are. Again, historically, psychosocially, we categorized marijuana as a Schedule I drug.
Right.
Heroin, marijuana,
right.
No medical value whatsoever and high abuse potential. What we're seeing now is that there are circumstances where there is legitimate medical use, but we have to be careful with that because we're kind of just using that as ammunition to just open it wide.
Right.
But I do think there's been some really good research. There's been some great meta-analysis where they look at 3,000, 4,000 studies and bring that information together. And I do think part of the conversation really needs to be is, what is the impact on the adult population as they utilize marijuana? That's a very different conversation to teens and adolescents, because the impact is very different and the risk is much different.
Josiah, you work a lot with kids. What kind of pressure do kids, young people, adolescents experience to use early and to not have these conversations with their parents?
Yeah, well, I think what I've seen through teenagers, young people, is that most of the time the pressure that is placed on them exists in a place that will never exist in another season of their life. Meaning, when they become older, all of a sudden it's no longer this pressure of being cool and trendy. But when you're a young person, you almost think like it's your whole world. And because you're in this fundamental developmental stage of your life, you're thinking there's nothing on the other side of this. If I get rejected by my friends, there's absolutely no life left for me. If I get, my parents are disappointed in me, there's a broken relationship for the rest of my life. That's how young people think because they're still in that formational process. And I think that's what's dangerous about it, is because even with people in their faith, you go wavering. So many teenagers are like, I rebelled against God in my teenage years. And then as soon as they get to college, on the other side of college, when real life starts hitting, they're like, I need God. And I think what's happened is we're not normalizing enough that piece of, hey, this is a real thing going on. Let's actually have real conversation about it. And I love what you guys were saying, just even about making it about people. At the end of the day, we have to have policy. We have to have things to look at. You know, the Bible is policy, but we have to always value Jesus first, which is loving people, meeting them where they're at. Because if you don't have a conversation and it's just a hammer, then people just rebel all the more.
That's good advice. So let's get very, very practical here. To people where do you start to have a real conversation? People in church settings are very intimidated by a conversation about marijuana because of all the stereotypes. Take 30 seconds or so to tell me about where do you start the conversation?
Yeah, the starting point is a hard one, and I think going to the parents, asking them to, hey, let's lay aside the vilification of marijuana. Let's understand that this is a real temptation for all kinds of reasons in our kids. Beyond just temptation through peers, there's also wanting to assuage fear, anxiety, sadness. And we say, hey, this is bad for you. And then they have an experience, well, actually, I felt better when I used this. There's not a long-term consequence. They're looking to quiet this, what they're feeling right now. Just my own anecdotal experience is one of my sons was using marijuana in adolescence. We became aware of that, and we entered into that conversation with him. And over time, it was a time-based conversation, but much later when he was maybe not quite 25, but he was still in that post-18-year-old, so he's making his own decisions. He said to me, Dad, I want you to understand how important it was that you were willing to sit and have the conversation with me. He said, you don't understand how many of my peers long to sit with their parents and have an honest conversation without judgment and accusation and law, but just understand where I'm coming from.
Dr. White, I think we're going to have to leave it there. That is a great place to start the conversation. I hope this was helpful to those who are watching. Well, thank you to our Morning Light panel. Coming up on Morning Light, we're going to have a special conversation with a woman who shares her journey about losing her son to drug addiction and turns tragedy into a platform to inform and help others. But first, good morning to Fountain View at Logan Square in Philadelphia. You're watching Morning Light on Lighthouse TV.
When I found out my son was smoking weed, I thought it was just part of adolescence.
But then I found out how powerful weed is now.
It's so much more powerful than weed from the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
When teens use vapes or dabs, the potency can be 80 to 100% THC.
Use of high THC products by youth can cause hallucinations, cannabis-induced psychosis,
and come with increased risks of suicidal thoughts,
planning, and attempts.
Just Say No, KNOW. Go to justsayno.org today for the facts.
A parent's worst nightmare came true when 19-year-old Johnny Stack died by suicide. He was addicted to THC. I spoke with his mother, Laura Stack, founder and CEO of Johnny's Ambassadors. Laura, talk to us about your son.
Well, Johnny was a wonderful young man. He was incredibly active in school and in sports. He was involved in our church. He was warm and funny and had a lot of friends and very, very smart. He got a perfect SAT score in math, 800 out of 800, and had straight A's and a scholarship to Colorado State University. Unfortunately, he discovered marijuana when he was 14 years old, when it was legalized here in Colorado, and became addicted to it. And sadly, 5 years later, when he was 19 years old, he experienced psychosis and thought the mob was after him and took his life. So we lost him in the course of 5 years to marijuana addiction and the psychosis that resulted from that.
As a parent, I can't imagine going through something like this. How did you deal with this?
Well, when we lost him, it was the end of 2019 before the holidays, and then it was COVID in early 2020. So we were alone, and in our grief, I basically was in a fetal position for 6 months, and I write to heal and began to write and told his story, the dangerous truth about today's marijuana, Johnny Stack's life and death story, and put it on Amazon. And that's really where things started to take off. People started to really understand our message and our research. We put a scientific advisory board of doctors together and formed a nonprofit, Johnny's Ambassadors Youth Marijuana Prevention. So this has been our way of healing and trying to educate other people about the harms of THC use, whether it's vapes or dabs or smoking or edibles, particularly on adolescent brain development. And now my husband and I travel around the United States full time when school's in session, and we give school assemblies. So I do about 200 a year now and talk to over 100,000 teens a year. So that is our mission, to try to keep this from happening to somebody else.
So this is really what Johnny's Ambassadors is all about.
Yes, it's really trying to raise awareness and sound the alarm, really educating the public, communities, parents, teens, law enforcement, medical professionals, that THC products are incredibly potent. One dab on a wax pen is the same as 50 joints from when I was a kid. It is a completely different product, and it's wreaking havoc on the mental health of our children. And it's critically important that there is no level of THC in the developing brain.
So you are using something so tragic to really make a difference.
We believe that it's working. We now have nearly 15,000 ambassadors around the United States, 150 different trainers, 50 different teens who do peer-to-peer education. We have mentors as parents, and sadly 1,500 parents whose children are in cannabis-induced psychosis right now in mental hospitals and in our support groups. So although the problem continues to grow and legalization continues to expand, we know that our work is more imperative than ever before, and we are definitely trying to make a difference out there.
And what is your message to our viewers?
The message is, just because marijuana is legal in some states does not mean that it's harmless.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
If you are interested in becoming one of Johnny's ambassadors, there are many ways to participate and get involved. To learn more, go to johnnysambassadors.org. And coming up on Morning Light, for 65 years, a faith-based treatment program has been on a mission to help young people and adults who struggle with addiction. We will hear from Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge. Good morning, Reading, home to the William Penn Memorial Fire Tower. Thank you for watching Morning Light. The National Survey on Drug Use and Health says nearly 48 million Americans struggled with addiction last year. Marijuana is one of the drugs teens and adults are addicted to. And joining us right now is Simon Dietz, Regional Director with Business Development and with Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge. Thanks for being with us.
It's good to be here.
I want to talk to you about this organization. It's been around since the 1960s. My mother reminded me yesterday that, oh, don't you remember Teen Challenge would always come to our church and talk to us, talk to the teens. So tell me about the organization.
Yeah, so Teen Challenge was started in the late 50s. Reverend Wilkerson felt called by God to witness to gang members in New York City. So it's an interesting story of him going there, getting thrown out of a courtroom. But then eventually, early 60s, he started a facility in Berks County, a training center and a treatment center where he would bring individuals out of the city for addiction and rehabilitation. And then the Naaman Center was started by Dr. Martin, who was a psychiatrist and a pastor who had a vision for faith-based licensed care. And that started in 1990. In 2019, we merged together Pennsylvania Adult Teen Challenge and Naaman Center to create a full continuum of what we call faith-based licensed care for addiction.
Yeah, that is certainly wonderful. Talk to us about marijuana. Since it has been legalized in many states, are you seeing more of a problem with both youth and adults?
Yes, so we are seeing an increase in youth use and also just an increase in thinking that it's okay. It's very normalized. The Pew Research Center recently did a study, earlier this year, that 57% of adults are in favor of full legalization, 88% are in favor of legalization or medical use. So with that, we're seeing just an increase in recreational use. People are viewing it as a safer alternative to alcohol, to cigarettes. It's kind of normalized almost to the point that there's not a problem with it in most people's minds.
And for the youth and the adults who are in your program, what are you hearing from them? What are they telling you?
So definitely with the youth, again, they're using it. They think that everyone's using it. So they view it as a fairly normal, safe thing, and also thinking that other people don't understand. So we heard a little bit earlier of kind of the polarization of the different views. I'm not seeing a lot of actual conversations about it. Everyone kind of has their view, either that it's completely bad or it's the best thing for mankind, and people are kind of shooting past each other and not really having conversations about it.
Speaking about the conversations, why don't you tell us more about your faith-based program and how you really treat them as far as this addiction is concerned?
Right. Yeah, so with Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge, it's a residential program that is only for adults, so it's 18 and up. With Naaman Center, we have outpatient and intensive outpatient centers, and we are able to see youth in that program, 14 to 17. We view addiction as a disease model, but view it holistically. So it's kind of our belief that with clinical counseling and the understanding of addiction in partnership with a relationship with Jesus Christ and finding wholeness in God is the best way that someone has a chance. We believe complete wholeness comes through a relationship with Jesus Christ, but oftentimes kind of understanding the addiction, the effects it has on the brain, the body, on development, especially for youth, is really pivotal in someone kind of finding complete freedom.
And what outcomes are you seeing?
So we're seeing outcomes vary. Often in the treatment field, when we see people coming back, then we know what's happening. If they are successfully clean and sober for a lifetime, oftentimes we don't hear from them, especially at the outpatient world. But we are seeing if people are willing to work on their addiction and seek treatment, we do see fairly good outcomes.
And you're with them really every step of the way to sort of guide them through this. What is your message for adults, for teens, for grandparents? What can you tell them?
So something I heard from someone, they said, when you're having a conversation with someone, be willing to take their perspective for a test drive. And I think, again, with the conversations around this, many people, the youth have their views, the older people have their views, public opinion sways quickly, but really being willing to talk about what is the potential risk, what is the view of the potential gains, and why are they using, what are their friends saying about it, and really sitting down, having an honest conversation, not being scared of what the outcome would be, and having a conversation and then talking about what is truth, what is wholeness, and what is the best option.
Yeah, absolutely, and Dr. David White said that too. Listen.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And if you would like more information about Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge, go to paatc.org. You can also find out more information about the Naaman Center by going to naamancenter.com. We're back in a minute. Welcome back. Good morning, Pittsburgh, where you can check out the Duquesne Incline. Thank you for watching Morning Light. And back to you, Jeff, for your final thoughts.
Well, thank you, Deborah. Look, it is easy to forget when we're watching politicians debate issues like marijuana that there are tens of thousands of stories from every small town and big city showing how issues are so much more than statistics or polls. Every issue connects to a person, Each of our personal decisions affects more people than we know. If you're a mom who's lost a son or daughter to addiction, this wasn't an easy conversation. If you've been counting the days since the last time you used, today's a miracle. Look, sometimes church families, like all families, don't quite know how to deal with issues like these. But if you can sense someone is struggling because of something they posted online or some other clue, call, text, do it now. Let them know you're praying for them, that they're loved, that they're not alone. Be for them the person you needed when you were at your lowest and unlovely. That's the gospel in real life. For Debra and the entire Morning Light team, I'm Jeff Coleman. Thanks for starting your day with us. We'll see you again very soon.